Good evening, children. Tonight's story is called Ali Baba and the Stolen Treasure. Chapter 1. Kassim and Ali Baba. It's a strange fact, but sometimes brothers can be so different from each other in character you might think they couldn't possibly be from the same family at all. Such was the case with two Persian brothers called Kassim and Ali Baba. To put things in a nutshell, Kassim was as greedy, deceitful and arrogant as Ali Baba was generous, honest and good-hearted. Kassim married the daughter of a rich man to get at her family's money when he died. Ali Baba married a girl from a poor family for the simple reason that he loved her. So the two brothers seemed destined to follow very different paths. Kassim did indeed grow richer and richer, but he always wanted more. Ali Baba, meanwhile, barely made a living as a woodcutter, but at least he was happy with what he had. He was even happier when he and his wife had a baby son, although things were already tough for them and it's harder to feed 3 mouths than 2. Still, the years went by and Ali Baba and his family survived and stayed happy, and their baby son, who was called Ahmed, grew into a fine young man. Then, one day, Ali Baba set out as usual for the forest with his donkey and decided to try his luck in a thicket he rarely visited. He started work, cutting branches, when he suddenly heard galloping horses, and they were coming his way. Ali Baba could hear the unmistakable chink of weapons as well, and that made him nervous. So he pushed his donkey into the undergrowth and scrambled up the nearest tree as quickly as he could. He reached the top and looked down just as a column of 40 horsemen appeared on a forest path. They rode past and stopped at a wall of rock that stood beyond the thicket. One glance at their wild, brutal faces told Ali Baba they were bandits. He quivered with fright. Chapter 2. Open Sesame. Ali Baba sat in the tree, trembling with fear, trying to stay concealed and hoping the bandits wouldn't notice the leaves shaking. But then something happened that made Ali Baba stop trembling and his mouth fall open with wonder. One of the bandits, a very cruel-looking man who was obviously their captain, thought Ali Baba, dismounted his horse and stood by the wall of rock. "Open sesame!" the captain said in a loud, strong voice. And suddenly a hidden door opened in the rock, revealing a secret cave. The captain strode in, and his men dismounted and followed him. Each bandit was carrying a bulging saddlebag. Ali Baba heard the captain say, "Close sesame!" from inside the cave, and the hidden door instantly swung shut. Well, Ali Baba sat in the tree amazed by what he'd seen and surprised that the name of a common seed could be magical. He wondered what on earth was going to happen next. Then the door opened again. The 40 bandits emerged, their saddlebags empty, and climbed back onto the horses. The captain said, "Close sesame!" And the door swung shut, and the robber band galloped away. Ali Baba waited a good long while before he climbed down from the tree to be sure that the bandits had actually gone. But he did at last, creeping up to the wall of rock to examine it, and there was no sign of a door at all. Ali Baba stood there scratching his head, deeply curious about what might be inside. And then he wondered if the captain's words might work for him too. "Open sesame!" he said, far too nervous to say it as loud as the captain of the bandits. But the door opened in just the same way as before. Ali Baba cautiously stepped over the threshold of the cave. The bandits had left a torch burning in a wall's sconce, and in its flickering light, Ali Baba saw that the cave was much bigger than he'd thought, and that its floor was entirely covered in treasure. Ali Baba thought bandits must have been storing their ill-gotten gains there for years, and then he suddenly realised something else. This was a golden opportunity. Ali Baba grabbed a couple of big bags of gold. The bandits wouldn't miss them from such a vast store, he thought, and hurried out of the cave, remembering to say "Close sesame" as he emerged. The hidden door swung shut, leaving the wall smooth. And then he loaded the bags of gold onto his donkey and headed for home. Ali Baba's wife, Aisha, couldn't believe her eyes when he opened one of the bags. Now it was her turn to sit with eyes wide and mouth open as Ali Baba explained where the bags of gold had come from. Then she danced around the room and hugged her husband. "How much have we actually got?" Aisha said at last. "I'm not really sure," said Ali Baba. "And we don't have time to count it. I want to hide it as quickly as possible. If somebody should see that we've got all this gold, they might start asking questions. I think we should keep it a secret." Ali Baba got Aisha to help him hide the gold and went out to sell his firewood as usual. Aisha, however, couldn't rest until she knew the exact amount of their newfound wealth, and then she had an idea. She wouldn't have time to get the gold out of its hiding place, count it and hide it again before Ali Baba came home, but she would have plenty of time to weigh it. Being a poor family, they had never had enough money to spend on luxuries such as a set of kitchen scales. Aisha knew her sister-in-law had some though. So she dashed off to Kassim's house. "Kitchen scales," said Kassim's wife, Fatima, who was as greedy and arrogant as her husband, and had a suspicious mind as well. "Yeah, well, of course I'll lend them to you, my dear, so long as you tell me why you need them." No special reason," spluttered Aisha, who was too honest to feel comfortable telling lies. "I just have to weigh something, that's all." "Is that so?" said Fatima, smiling at Aisha while her mind worked overtime. "Well, you wait here while I fetch them." Fatima went off to the kitchen and got out her scales. She carefully rubbed a little fat on the bottom of one of the pans, and then Fatima rejoined Aisha and handed over the scales. Aisha went home, quickly got out the gold, weighed it, and then hid it again. Then she returned the scales to her sister-in-law. She was too happy and excited to notice that one small gold coin had stuck to the fat in the pan. However, eagle-eyed Fatima soon found it. That evening, Kassim went to see his brother. As soon as Ali Baba opened the door, his heart sank. "So, it seems you've come into such a great sum of money, brother," said Kassim, "that your wife has had to weigh it and can afford to leave coins stuck to the pan." Aisha squeaked. "You'd better tell me what's going on," said Kassim. Ali Baba sighed, but he couldn't be cross with his wife. He willingly told his brother the whole story. Kassim's eyes glittered with greed. He went home determined to take all the treasure of the cave for himself. "Oh well, never mind," said Ali Baba when Kassim had left. I've been thinking we should use the money anyway, you know. Who'll notice if we buy a few new clothes for ourselves? Huh? We could even hire a servant girl to help with the housework." So the next morning, Ali Baba, Aisha and Ahmed went shopping in the bazaar. Then they hired a girl called Mariana to be their servant. Mariana was just an orphan and was very grateful for the job. Meanwhile, an eager and excited Kassim was making his way through the forest with a train of donkeys to carry the hidden treasure home. Chapter 3. Kassim and the Cave. Kassim arrived at the bandits' cave at last and stood before the wall. He looked round to make sure he was completely alone and cleared his throat, and then he said, "Open sesame." And the hidden door opened smoothly, just as it had done for Ali Baba. Kassim gave a little giggle of delight and went into the cave. He lit a torch he had brought and stared at the kind of sight guaranteed to make the heart of a greedy man beat faster. But there was no time to waste. He said, "Close sesame," and started choosing what to take. He soon had a great heap of bags and chests by the entrance, while his mind was fizzing with plans to return for the rest and schemes for what he could do now he was probably the richest man in the world. He turned to face the door and realised he had forgotten the magic words. The truth was that Kassim's brain didn't have a great deal of room in it, and all the plans and schemes had pushed almost everything else out. He knew the first magic word was open, of course. That was obvious. And the second was a common seed, something that you planted. Open wheat, he said. No effect. Open corn. No. Open barley. Open rice. Oh, for heaven's sake, just open. But the door stayed obstinately, infuriatingly shut. Kassim pounded on the rock with his fists, and suddenly it opened. But his smile of relief soon vanished, for standing outside were the 40 thieves, their captain at their head. None of them looked too happy. The captain drew out his sword. It was a great, curved, wickedly sharp scimitar, and advanced into the cave, pushing Kassim into. Kassim stumbled and fell. The bandits were furious to discover someone in their secret cave, and they didn't stop to ask questions. The captain killed Kassim and chopped his body into several pieces, which his men hung inside the entrance as a grisly warning. They then closed the cave door and galloped off down the forest path. Night came, and Fatima waited for her husband to return, but the hours passed with no sign of Kassim, and by the time the sun rose the next morning, Fatima was frantic with worry. She ran to Ali Baba's house and demanded that he go and find out what had happened. Ali Baba set off with his donkey, filled with fear for his brother. And of course, he was horrified when the cave door opened and he saw Kassim in pieces. He put the pieces into a couple of sacks, loaded them onto the donkey, and then he hurried home to Aisha and Fatima with the terrible news. Fatima wailed and tore her hair, and Aisha tried to comfort her. Ali Baba, however, was brooding about the consequences of Kassim's death. "We can't let anyone know he was chopped up," he said. "If the bandits hear, they'll be able to work out that I know about the secret cave too. We'll just have to find some way of putting Kassim's body back together again before we let the undertaker see him." "Can I make a suggestion?" said somebody. It was Mahana, the servant girl. She had already grown to love her kind employers, and she wanted to help them now. "An old tailor lives in the other side of town," she went on, "and everyone says he's so good at his work that he could stitch a gash in your skin and leave no scar. Perhaps we could ask him to do it." Ali Baba was impressed by Mahana's cleverness, and so was Ahmed, who had come when he had heard Fatima wailing. In fact, the two young people rather liked the look of each other. Mahana went to see the tailor and offered him a large payment for a very special job. He agreed, and Mahana led him blindfolded into the dark cellar of Ali Baba's house, where she took off his blindfold and showed him the pieces of Kassim. The tailor shrugged, thought of the money, and did the job. Then the tailor was blindfolded again and taken back to his shop, where Mahana thanked him, gave him a large bonus, and swore him to secrecy. Mahana had been right. The tailor's work was so good you couldn't see the stitches. The next day, Ali Baba sadly announced that his beloved brother Kassim had died in his sleep, and an expensive funeral was arranged. And afterwards, Ali Baba sighed with relief and hoped that it was the end of it. But alas, it wasn't. At that very moment, the captain of the bandits was swearing and kicking at the treasure heaps in the secret cave. As soon as the cave door had opened and he had seen that the pieces of Kassim's body had gone, he realised that somebody else must know the secret of the hidden cave. "We must find whoever it is and kill him," he roared. "Yeah, and all his family," roared his 39 men. And so the captain and his men went into the city in disguise. They asked if there had been a recent funeral involving a corpse chopped into several pieces. They had no luck. But then one of the bandits happened to stop at the tailor's shop. By now the tailor had had time to think about what he'd done, and he was finding it very hard to keep his vow of secrecy. It didn't take the bandit long to get the truth out of him, and then, after a small payment was offered and accepted, the tailor allowed himself to be blindfolded once more. He led the bandit to Ali Baba's house by touch and hearing and smell. The bandit smiled and marked the doorpost with a small chalk cross, and then he quickly took the tailor back to his shop and hurried off to find the captain. A while later, Mahana came back from shopping in the bazaar and noticed the chalk cross. It immediately made her feel uneasy, so she found some chalk and made crosses on the other doorposts in the street. She didn't mention the incident to Ali Baba, not wanting to worry him or the rest of the family, but Mahana decided she would definitely stay alert now. The captain, however, wasn't so easily fooled. When he saw the crosses on every door, he marched off into the tailor's shop. Soon the happy tailor, he'd been given yet another payment of gold coins, was blindfolded again and led the captain back to Ali Baba's house. The captain didn't mark the doorpost, though. He knew he'd remember the house well enough without that. Chapter 4. Mahana and the Jars of Olive Oil. The next evening there was a knocking on Ali Baba's door. He opened it to a man whose face was half covered by a turban. Behind the man was a line of pack horses, each one bearing a large earthenware jar. "Good evening, friend," said the man. "I am a travelling merchant, just arrived in your city. I wondered if you might know of a place to stay." "Why, you must stay here," replied Ali Baba, as generous as ever. "Of course, your pack horses will be safe in our courtyard." The man smiled wickedly as Ali Baba led him in, for he was none other than the captain in disguise. He had made inquiries about the man who lived in this house and been told of his kindness, so he guessed Ali Baba would offer him a bed. But the captain wouldn't be staying in bed. Each of those earthenware jars concealed one of the captain's men, and they were waiting for his signal, a light tap on the outside of the jar, to creep out and slaughter everyone in the house. Mahana prepared a meal for the guest, then went out to check that the horses were comfortable. She'd heard Ali Baba asking the merchant what was in the jars. The man had said they were filled with olive oil, but when Mahana accidentally brushed against one of the jars, she froze when she heard a man's voice whisper from within it. "Is it time yet?" said the voice. Suddenly Mahana suspected that her master and his family were in mortal danger. She realised that the merchant must be the captain of the bandits and that his men were concealed in the jars. "Not yet," she whispered back, thinking quickly. Then she went indoors and came up with another plan. Mahana boiled up plenty of oil and poured it into each of the jars, killing all 39 bandits. She went to tell Ali Baba, and just then the captain went to the courtyard to summon his men. When he realised that his plot had been uncovered, he fled into the night before he too was killed, but he vowed to wreak his revenge. Mahana showed Ali Baba the bodies in the jars, and he went cold at the thought of what might have happened. "I can't ever thank you enough, Mahana," Ali Baba murmured. "I'll do anything to help you," said Mahana. "No one has ever been as kind and as generous to me as you and Aisha." Things did seem to quieten down over the next few months, so Ali Baba and his family relaxed and enjoyed their prosperity. Ali Baba even set Ahmed up in business with a shop of his own. Then one day, several years later, Ahmed asked Ali Baba if he could invite a friend of his to dinner at their house. "His name is Hussein," said Ahmed. "He owns the shop next door to mine." Ali Baba agreed, and the feast was arranged. All the family were there, even Fatima, and the guest of honour arrived bang on time. Thoughtfully, Mahana took Hussein's cloak to hang it up. After all this time, she had begun to think that they must be safe, but there was something about this man that made her feel uneasy. Mahana went round with a flask of wine. When she leaned over Hussein to pour some wine into his cup, she glimpsed something that chilled her blood. The handle of a dagger that was concealed inside Hussein's tunic. Mahana instantly realised why Hussein was familiar. He was disguised again, but he was obviously the merchant whose men she had killed in the jars, which meant he was also the captain of the bandits, come to kill them all. Mahana slipped into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, which she kept behind her back when she returned to the feast. She was just in time. Ali Baba had his back to Hussein, and Hussein had his hand inside his tunic. Mahana strode over and plunged her knife into Hussein's heart. Hussein died instantly, and then there was chaos. Aisha and Fatima screamed. Fatima the loudest, while both Ali Baba and Ahmed leapt to their feet with expressions of horror on their faces. "You have killed Ahmed's friend," wailed Ali Baba. "Have you gone mad, girl?" "No," said Mahana. "He was about to kill you." Mahana explained and showed Ali Baba the dagger concealed in Hussein's tunic. And when Ali Baba looked more closely at Hussein, he wondered why he hadn't seen that he was none other than the captain of the bandits. And so at last they were safe. To Ali Baba's delight, Mahana and Ahmed soon announced that they were in love and wanted to get married, which they did. And Ali Baba and his family lived in happiness and prosperity ever after, their growing wealth helped by occasional visits to a certain hidden cave. They were the only ones who knew about it after all. So that's the end of Ali Baba and the stolen treasure. Good night, children. Sleep well. Say your prayers, don't forget. And I'll see you tomorrow with another story.